The night my mother handed the keys to my family's Brooklyn cafe to my cousin, right in front of me, in front of everyone, I realized something brutal. Sometimes, the people you trust most are the ones who will bury you with a smile. For years, I believed blood was thicker than betrayal. But standing in that crowded room, applause erupting for someone else's success, I finally understood how easy it is to become a ghost in your own life. My name is Harper Lane, and if you think family can't break you, you've never stood in my shoes. I wasn't surprised, not really. Deep down, I'd always known that in my family, being seen meant being Sophie. From the time we were kids, she was the golden one, the daughter who could do no wrong, the one who made my mother's eyes light up at every family dinner, who got a standing ovation for her half-baked cupcakes while I was told to aim for something practical. Birthdays were the worst. Sophie's were parties, hers came with mountains of gifts and stories that would be retold for years. Mine? Neatly wrapped envelopes with just what you need for school, and an awkward smile that made me wish I'd never gotten older at all. But the truth is, I didn't want their pity. I wanted what anyone wants, a chance to prove myself. My father had passed when I was 16, leaving behind his tiny Brooklyn cafe and a mountain of debts nobody wanted. I watched as the place fell into disrepair, ignored by everyone but me. My mother talked about selling it, about letting go of the past, but I couldn't do it. That cafe was more than bricks and faded tile, it was the last real piece of my father I had. So, I made a promise to myself, if nobody else would fight for it, I would. And that's how it started. No inheritance, no golden ticket, just me, barely out of college, scraping together tips from waiting tables and barista gigs, walking past that dusty storefront every day, dreaming about turning it into something real. Even then, I should have seen it coming. In my family, love always came with conditions, and the only thing more dangerous than being invisible was daring to want something for yourself. For the next 2 years, every spare dollar I had went into the cafe. I spent my weekends scraping gum off tile, patching leaky pipes, and repainting walls long faded by city soot and indifference. My friends called me stubborn. My mother called me foolish. But slowly, the place began to change. The smell of burnt coffee and old regrets faded, replaced by the sound of laughter and the rich, earthy aroma of fresh espresso. I tested out new recipes late at night, alone in the quiet hum of the empty shop, and imagined a future where Harper's Brew was more than just a dream taped to a crumbling window. Sophie would stop by sometimes, never to help, but to snap a photo for her Instagram, telling her followers how inspiring her cousin was. My mother would show up with her thin smile and critical eyes, running a finger over countertops and asking when I'd get a real job. Every compliment was edged with a warning, don't get too comfortable, don't expect too much. Still, I pressed on. I learned the rhythms of early mornings and late nights, of loyal regulars and the slow, hard-earned respect of the neighborhood. For once in my life, I could see myself reflected in something that was growing, something I'd built with my own hands. But even as the cafe's fortune started to turn, a shadow always lingered at the edge of every small victory, a reminder that in my family, nothing was ever truly safe. Every smile from my mother, every supportive word from Sophie, felt like it came with an invisible string. And somewhere, deep inside, I wondered how long it would last before someone tried to cut me out, again. It happened on a Tuesday, a day that started like any other, with rain spattering against the windows and the scent of fresh bagels drifting in from the bakery down the block. I was restocking shelves when my mother arrived, her umbrella dripping a trail across the floor. She looked tired, the kind of tired that had nothing to do with the weather. "We need to talk, Harper," she said, her voice tight. My stomach clenched. Nothing good ever followed those words. She settled onto a bar stool and launched into the story. The cafe owed back taxes, thousands of dollars, more than I could ever hope to cover on my own. If we didn't pay, the city would seize the building. She talked about our family legacy, how my father would be heartbroken if we lost his cafe. She said she'd tried everything. She needed my help. I felt the familiar tug, guilt, duty, the desperate urge to finally be seen as more than an afterthought. Against all logic, I agreed. I drained my savings account, money I'd set aside for emergencies, for a future I'd barely started building. I handed it all over, telling myself it was an investment in something bigger than me. She promised, over and over, that the cafe would always be mine. That this sacrifice meant I was finally, truly, part of the family's story. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But even as I handed her that cashier's check, something inside me whispered that in my family, promises were just another kind of currency, spent quickly, forgotten even faster. The weeks that followed felt like a strange, slow-motion blur. My account balance hovered just above zero, but I told myself it didn't matter. Every time I walked into the cafe, I tried to see past the peeling paint and chipped mugs, to imagine possibility where there was only exhaustion. The city's tax office sent official letters, thick and heavy as shame, but I stacked them neatly in a drawer, trusting that the worst was behind us. My mother's tone softened, at least for a while. She would bring by loaves of fresh bread, offer to water the succulents in the front window, or stand quietly behind the counter as the morning rush swept through. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when I let myself believe we'd turned some invisible corner. That maybe, just maybe, the rules had finally changed and I'd earned a place not only in the family business, but in the family itself. At night, when the cafe lights flickered low and the last regular had left, I would sit in the empty shop with a mug of cooling coffee cupped in my hands, watching the city lights smear across the rain-washed glass. The floor beneath my feet was uneven in places, creaking in the same spots it had since childhood. I remembered tracing my father's footsteps along those boards, learning the recipe for his signature cinnamon blend, listening as he explained that coffee, like family, could be bitter or sweet, depending on what you poured into it. I poured in everything I had. Yet, for every improvement I made, for every bill paid, every hour spent cleaning and dreaming, there lingered a restlessness I couldn't quite name. Sometimes I'd catch Sophie's reflection in the window as she strolled past with friends, her laughter loud and easy, never once pausing to come inside. I wondered if she ever noticed how much work goes unseen until it's gone. My hands bore new scars and calluses. My hope, though battered, still flickered quietly somewhere beneath the fatigue. And every time I locked up for the night, I pressed my palm to the old brass door handle and whispered a silent promise to the empty cafe. No matter what it takes, I won't let you go. Not for them. Not for anyone. The cafe began to blossom again, almost in spite of itself. Word of mouth brought a steady trickle of new faces, students lingering over lattes, old-timers trading stories, young couples tracing hearts in spilled sugar. Each week, the chalkboard outside held a new special, and regulars would tease me for my relentless optimism. For the first time in years, I started to believe the tide was finally turning. That's when Sophie reappeared, stepping into the cafe one brisk Saturday morning with a glossy magazine under her arm and the smell of expensive perfume trailing after her. She moved with a confidence I'd never managed to learn, her presence, as always, demanding attention. "Harper," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt staged for an invisible audience. "Everyone's talking about your place. You've really made something of Dad's old shop." Her words hovered between compliment and warning. She settled into a corner booth, crossed her legs, and launched into her pitch. She wanted to host a pop-up event at the cafe, a ticketed night with live music, influencers, and serious exposure for both of us. "You've done the hard work, but it's time to think bigger," she said, flashing that signature Russo smile. I hesitated. Part of me ached to say yes, to believe that maybe Sophie wanted to help, to finally stand beside me rather than in front of me. But another part, older, wiser, stitched together by years of hard lessons, wondered what she truly wanted. Still, I agreed, my answer caught somewhere between hope and resignation. In the days leading up to the event, Sophie was everywhere, tweaking the menu, calling local journalists, inviting her influencer friends. My mother beamed as she watched us work together, her eyes shining with a pride I'd long stopped expecting. But late at night, when the cafe was silent and my reflection stared back from the glass, I felt the old unease stirring. In my family, partnership always seemed to come with a hidden price. I just hadn't figured out what Sophie's would be, yet. The night of the pop-up arrived, and the cafe had never looked more alive. Twinkling string lights danced above crowded tables, music spilled out onto the sidewalk, and laughter rose in a steady hum that made even the walls seem to pulse with energy. For a few brief hours, it was easy to believe in happy endings. Sophie floated through the crowd, greeting guests, snapping photos, and making introductions. People raved about the drinks, the pastries, the cozy warmth of the place. My regulars raised their cups to me, grinning as if they'd known all along what I was capable of. But beneath the surface, I noticed things that didn't add up. Sophie spent more time in the back office than on the floor, her phone glued to her ear in urgent, whispered conversations. I caught my mother slipping Sophie a thick folder when she thought I wasn't looking. The uneasy feeling from before hardened into dread. I pushed it aside, reminding myself not to be paranoid, not to ruin the first real celebration in years. Near midnight, when the last song faded and the crowd began to thin, Sophie called everyone's attention. Standing at the center of the cafe, she tapped her glass, waiting for the hush to settle. "I want to thank you all for supporting our family's legacy," she began, eyes shining with excitement. "Tonight is more than just a party, it's the start of something bigger. That's why I'm thrilled to announce a new partnership. Going forward, Russo and Lane Coffee will open 2 new locations, under my direction." A wave of applause erupted. My mother beamed with pride, pulling Sophie in for a hug. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. I forced myself to smile, to nod, to act as if this was all part of the plan. But inside, I felt something shatter. Sophie hadn't just hijacked my event, she'd taken my future, my work, my father's dream, and rebranded it in her own name. The celebration blurred into numbness. Every congratulation felt like a nail sealing shut a door I'd spent years trying to open. That night, long after the lights dimmed and the guests had gone, I sat alone in the silent cafe, tracing the grain of the counter with trembling fingers. I realized, with cold clarity, that in my family, even triumphs could be stolen, and that I was more alone than ever. Sleep evaded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Sophie's voice echoed in my skull, her announcement, the applause, my mother's glowing face. The word partnership replayed like a cruel joke. I couldn't stop replaying every warning sign I'd ignored, the late-night calls, the secretive meetings, the folder passed between mother and cousin. By sunrise, something in me had shifted. The ache of betrayal gave way to a surge of cold resolve. I'd spent years believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself, I'd finally be chosen. But all I'd done was make myself indispensable to people who only saw my value when it benefited them. No more. That morning, I changed the locks on the cafe before anyone else arrived. I logged into the business accounts and reviewed every document Sophie had touched. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became: contracts signed behind my back, transfer of ownership paperwork filed with my mother's signature, profits siphoned off into new accounts under Russo and Lane. It was all there, in black and white. Evidence of betrayal, meticulously documented. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I gathered everything: emails, bank records, receipts, into a thick folder of my own. Then I called a lawyer. If Sophie and my mother wanted a war, I'd fight on my terms. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the Brooklyn skyline, I sat in the empty cafe and dialed my father's old number. The line had long been disconnected, but just holding the phone grounded me. "I'm done being quiet, Dad," I whispered into the silence. "I'm done letting them write me out of my own story." By the time Sophie showed up at closing, rattling the locked door, I was ready. The fear was still there, coiled in my gut, but for the first time, it was matched by something stronger: determination. They had built their schemes on the hope I would stay silent. But I was about to show them just how loud I could be. The next morning, the cafe was barely open before Sophie burst through the door, her face flushed with indignation. My mother trailed close behind, her lips pressed in a thin line. Sophie stormed up to the counter, demanding to know why her key no longer worked, why the business accounts had been frozen, why her name had disappeared from the company website overnight. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. For once, I didn't shrink from the confrontation. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and laid it on the counter between us. "These are the contracts you filed without my knowledge," I said, voice low but unwavering. "These are the bank statements showing where the profits have been funneled. Here are the messages, the emails, the signatures. Everything." Sophie snatched the papers, scanning each page, her confidence slipping away with every line she read. My mother tried to intervene, her tone oscillating between pleading and scolding. "Harper, sweetheart, this is just a misunderstanding. Families make mistakes. We can work this out privately." "No, Mom. Not this time." My hands shook, but I held my ground. "You both made your choices. You didn't just try to take the café. You tried to erase everything I'd built, everything Dad left behind." Sophie's bravado dissolved into anger. "You wouldn't even have this place if it wasn't for me. I made it popular. I gave it life." I felt something inside me finally snap. "You took what you wanted and expected me to be grateful. But I'm done letting you write my story." The silence that followed was electric, charged with years of resentment, regret, and unspoken truths. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said, looking from Sophie to my mother. "This is bigger than family now. If you want a fight, I'll give you one." They stared at me, stunned, realizing for the first time that I wasn't backing down. For the first time, I truly felt like the owner of my own life. News of the confrontation traveled faster than I expected. Within days, the story spilled beyond the walls of the café, rippling out through the neighborhood like a dropped cup shattering on tile. Regulars whispered over their coffee, friends texted in disbelief, and soon enough, the local business blog picked up the story, "Family Feud Over Beloved Brooklyn Café." Support flooded in from the most unexpected places. Customers left handwritten notes tucked under saucers. "This place wouldn't exist without you. We stand with Harper." Some offered legal advice, others brought food and supplies to keep me going. Even rival cafe owners, who'd once eyed me as competition, stopped by to offer a word of solidarity. Sophie and my mother, on the other hand, found themselves on the wrong side of public opinion. The community that once praised Sophie's flair and my mother's charm now saw through the glossy veneer. Their reputations, so carefully polished, began to tarnish. Invitations to influencer events dried up, business partners distanced themselves. The lawsuit moved forward, inching through the bureaucracy. There were tense meetings, attempts at negotiation, moments when I wondered if I'd have the strength to see it through. Some nights, the weight of the fight pressed heavy on my chest, and I would lie awake, tracing the shape of the future in the darkness. But every morning, the cafe doors opened to a new day, and I was greeted by smiles and encouragement, proof that, finally, my work was being seen for what it was, honest, hard-won, and truly mine. Slowly, the cafe transformed again, not just a place for coffee, but a symbol. A reminder that even in the wake of betrayal, you can reclaim what you've lost, and build something stronger in its place. As weeks slipped by, the worst of the storm began to settle. The lawsuit reached a conclusion in my favor, ownership of the cafe, the brand, and every piece of my father's legacy was officially, and finally, mine. Standing in the lawyer's office with the signed papers in hand, I felt both lighter and heavier at once. The weight of old wounds lingered, but a new freedom blossomed quietly in their place. When I returned to the cafe that afternoon, a small crowd was waiting, friends, regulars, even a few faces I barely recognized. They clapped, cheered, and one elderly neighbor pressed a simple note into my hand: "You did right by your father. And by yourself." The place looked different somehow, brighter, warmer, a little like hope itself had seeped into the walls. I rearranged the furniture, changed up the menu, painted over the scars of old memories. Each small act was a declaration: I am not who they said I was. I am more than their afterthought. Sophie, stripped of her spotlight, moved away to start over. My mother tried, awkwardly, to repair what had been broken, sending cards for birthdays and holidays, her words apologetic but thin. I replied with polite distance, realizing that forgiveness was no longer something I owed them, it was something I offered myself, day by day, in the quiet moments before the morning rush. the café became more than a business. It became a gathering place for others who knew the sting of family disappointment, the ones who walked in with heavy hearts and left a little lighter. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand at the window and watch the city lights flicker, feeling both the ache of what I'd lost and the pride in what I'd created. For the first time, my story wasn't written by anyone else's hand. I'd claimed it, flaws and all, and made something beautiful from the wreckage. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm I'd never known before, a rhythm that belonged only to me. The cafe thrived, not because of a family name or someone else's approval, but because every corner reflected my resilience, my vision, and the kindness of a community that chose to see me. I didn't reconcile with my mother, not fully. There were polite exchanges, brief phone calls, but the deep wounds remained, less raw, more like old scars that reminded me of just how far I'd come. Sophie never returned to Brooklyn. The distance felt like both a loss and a relief. Sometimes, when the evening sun cast golden light across the counter, I would remember the girl I used to be, the one desperate to be chosen, to belong. I realized she'd never really needed anyone's permission to matter. All she needed was the courage to stop waiting and start building a life on her own terms. Here's what I know now. Family is not defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by who shows up, who roots for you when it's easier not to, who respects what you've built even when they have nothing to gain. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Letting go of toxic loyalty isn't giving up, it's finally giving yourself the chance to grow. If you're listening and you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told you're not enough, let me be the one to remind you. You are the author of your own story. You get to choose who sits at your table. And if you found something of yourself in this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, hope, and finding your voice, even when it shakes. Because sometimes, letting go is exactly what sets you free.